Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Art of Leading, Captivating Leadership Narratives, all part of the stuff that growth is made of. I'm excited to introduce you today to Nishat Mehta. Nishat is the new CEO at Lexitas, and I'm really excited to have you here, Nishat. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Margaret. I appreciate it.
I'm excited for our listeners to have an opportunity to hear from you. So, would love to start our discussion by having you share an overview of your company and what services you provide.
Sure. So Lexitas is a private equity-backed firm that provides legal services nationwide to law firms and corporate legal departments. The services that we offer broadly tend to fit into a handful of buckets from court reporting to medical records retrieval, process serving, legal talent outsourcing, and then registered agent and other corporate services. We're the roll-up of about 50, 51 or so acquisitions over the course of the last decade. And the theme here is very much around tech enabling these services. These are services that are very people-oriented, but we strongly believe that with the right level of investment, we can make these services improved. We can bring better value to our clients, and we can do so more efficiently if we introduce the right level of technology. And so, as an example, summarizing a few hundred-page transcript of a deposition or a 10,000-page medical record in order to surface the most important things into a 2, 3, 4-page summary. Those are some examples of where we've begun to use some generative AI technologies to actually bring technology to a set of services that haven't previously necessarily been thought of as tech-enabled.
Yeah. And also, as you said, these could be really long documents. So I would imagine that really helps from efficiency and a
That's
productivity
absolutely right.
standpoint.
Absolutely.
And I would imagine it also sounds like the depth and breadth of your services is kind of a one-stop shop, right? I mean, they don't need to go to separate different companies to get those kind of services.
That's certainly the intent, that these are services that benefit from each other, that you could imagine taking a deposition and then using our deposition insights, the AI summarization that I alluded to call out a set of doctors that have been named in the deposition, for which we would then go out and retrieve the medical records associated with those doctors' appointments, and vice versa. And so these certainly do work together. And to your point, oftentimes on the same case, all of these services are actually needed. And as a result, an attorney we can develop a relationship with an attorney and help them throughout the entire litigation process.
Yeah, sounds great. So who is your target population in terms of the service you provide, and how does your company differentiate their services versus who else is out there?
Yeah, so I would say the target really falls into three broad buckets. One is law firms, firms that engage in litigation. The second would be corporations. We provide corporate services, registered agent services, corporate filings, business filings, things like that. And then the third would be corporate functions legal functions at corporations. So you could imagine insurance companies, for instance, that have quite a bit of litigation pending. You could imagine just general companies that are quite litigious or are constantly being sued, for which they wouldn't mind taking back some control over the third-party spend that their external law firms spend on. And we represent an opportunity to develop a direct relationship with the provider of those services across all of the law firms that they work with. And I would argue to your second question around sort of differentiation, we think about our differentiation really in three broad areas. One is what you alluded to earlier, the simplicity of having a single vendor to provide all of the services from process service all the way through to court reporting and medical records and talent outsourcing, et cetera. Second, we think we are quite responsibly focused on the adoption of technology. And I think it's really important to reference that word responsibly, because it's not our opinion that technology fits everywhere and anywhere, but rather let's make sure we introduce it when it can actually make the process better, when it's accurate, when it's timely, when it fits within the workflow, when it's consumable by a user, doesn't require massive amounts of retraining. And so we're very focused on introducing technology, but doing so in a very measured way that our clients are going to be able to take advantage of. So that would be the second area, I think, of differentiation. And then I think third is service. And I can appreciate that service is one of those things that everyone will talk about as their point of differentiation. It's very easy to call out a qualitative item as a point of differentiation. We're very proud of best in class net promoter score in the sort of excellent range as per their rankings. We have a very strong focus on dedicated points of contact within the organization. So rather than the sort of call center model, you call in and you get kind of whoever happens to be working that day. We're very focused on every one of our clients gets a designated account manager for their account, and they work with that individual across all time. Um, we recognize as a business, we have a very high volume business. We probably do 1.5 million transactions a year. We
Wow.
won't get every one of them right. We obviously will try, but even a 99.9% success rate means 1,500 jobs a year we did something wrong on. And we feel like the level of service that we provide has to be excellent enough to be able to overcome those moments where we didn't exactly get everything perfect. But you know what? We have a relationship with the client that ensures, one, that we will fix whatever we broke, and
Right.
then two, we learn from that and make sure that mistake doesn't happen again in the future.
I love that, especially as I'm listening to you, the two things that, really resonate with me is to have someone to call, right? As you said, you try to set everything up, intentions are good, but sometimes things happen. But if you're working with someone, it's not like you're calling into some 800 number and, you know, one, two, three. So I think that's really important. I love that. And then the technology piece too is it's not technology for the sake of technology, that it's really trying to be thoughtful on what is going to make this process the most effective and efficient and adding it. Well, thank you for sharing that. It sounds very impressive. Well, what I'd like to do before I ask my next question is I want to offer my congratulations. I understand that you are a newly appointed CEO.
Thank you.
So congratulations and continued success. I know on your LinkedIn profile, you talk about that your career kind of spanned three broad chapters. And would love for you to share a little bit more about your professional journey.
Appreciate the opportunity to do so. I certainly would not in any way imply that I knew I wanted to go on this journey when I began it, and I think that's probably maybe the biggest lesson for me, and frankly, not necessarily new to most of your listeners, that the journey is the process. The destination is not necessarily the only sort of fun part of this. But to your point around the three chapters, I spent 15 years at a software company, very began my career in the late 90s, so it was sort of the thing to do. But I also watched that company get destroyed during the dot-com bubble crash, and had to watch or be part of a rebuild of the company. But it was very interesting to work for a software company where you have some positives in terms of high margin business, a lot of excitement around the value you can bring to a client. Oftentimes, you are transforming the way that a client works, in this case, with their data. The challenge with software is that it's very difficult to differentiate yourself. Software can be written by others, and functionality can be replicated by others. And so, very much a leapfrogging industry where we release our newest version and we're on top for 6 months until our competitor releases their version. And it's hard to stay on top continuously. Second chapter was very much focused on information services. And so we were leveraging, in particular, consumer packaged goods data. So think loyalty card data from your grocery store to figure out how to improve the relationship between brands, CPG brands, and their consumers, and for that matter, retailers and their consumers. That to me was fascinating. One, because it solved the challenge we had in the lack of or the commoditization of software, in that we are the owners of the data, and when you own the data, nobody else has access to it. That is in and of itself a really big differentiator. But for me, I was fortunate enough to work with retailers like Tesco in the UK, Kroger in the US,
Mhm.
that are very heavily bought into the value of their data and the importance of customer loyalty. And so I learned a lot in that process, understanding how you focus on your existing customers versus always focused on bringing in new customers. I'll never forget checking in at a hotel. Don't need to mention the brand of hotel, but I had status with the hotel, literally next to somebody else checking in at the next station over, only to hear the person say, "Is this your first time at the hotel?" And when they answered yes, it was a welcome to the hotel. I've managed to get you an upgrade. While I'm, of course, right next to them, having stayed at this hotel 50 times previously and not being offered the same thing. And recognizing that that's
Mm.
not what you want to do. That's not how you build your best customers. It's not how you keep and retain customers. And it's certainly not how you surprise and delight them. And so that's really, I think for me, the second chapter was a big learning in terms of how you treat your customer, whether it's a B2B customer or in our case, a B2C customer. But the importance of loyalty, the importance of building loyalty, and the importance of making sure that you deliver a level of service that to your most loyal customers that justifies their loyalty to you. And it
Love that.
also gave me an opportunity to understand and appreciate the value of data. So in the time that I was at Kroger, Kroger began to develop another metric that they used in their earnings announcements focused on alternative revenue or alternative profits. And it's really this idea of money that is made not from the core retail business, but from outside that business. So in the media, the retail media business that they now are quite proud of, in their the store footprint and the little clinics that, the little sort of places where you can get um, shots and quick checkups and things like
Hmm.
that. So using their retail footprint for non-retail items. And in some sense, Amazon has perfected that with AWS and their ads business, is how do you build alternative forms of revenue? And oftentimes data is the foundation of that. So that was really interesting to me, is that data could actually be an asset rather than sort of exhaust that you kind of that comes off the business, but you do nothing with. And then my third chapter began about a year ago when I joined Lexitas. And for me, a lot of the appeal of this business was, one, it's a people-oriented business. It's professional services or business services. I think it's really valuable to remind myself that everything starts with the people that run the business, not just our employees, but the actual court reporters, the actual folks that make phone calls to the custodians to get medical records. These are all the extended network of folks that we work with that are all critical to running the business. It's helped me understand a small medium market business, a business that sells to small businesses, and the importance of that, the importance of volume of transaction as opposed to focusing on your 10 largest customers, because that's where 50% of your revenue comes from. And then it's helped me focus on how to build scalable processes. As I mentioned earlier, we do things 1.5 million times over. We've got to build a process that can support that throughout the company. And that goes from a sales process and a prospecting and a lead generation component to the actual delivery of our service, to the billing and collections aspect at the end of it, to a customer service component, et cetera. All of the divisions of the company have to be ready to scale.
Well, first of all, what an impressive journey. And I love how you've categorized it in terms of things you learned. I love the example of the hotel. I mean, the cost of sales is always going to be less with your current clients and keeping them happy, right? And I love also just what you mentioned about focusing on who your key stakeholders are. Kind of goes back to that same loyalty and customer journey, whether it's a stakeholder, internal, external, however that is. So very impressive. And again, congratulations on your
Thank
new role. But
thank you.
what a great journey. The other thing that I really loved when before we met was when I looked at LinkedIn, you have a quote by John Wooden, which I really appreciate. And it's the ability may get you to the top, but it takes character to keep you there. So I love that. Would love to hear from your perspective. How does that resonate with you?
So I think first, I grew up in Los Angeles. I grew up still am a huge Lakers fan. John Wooden fed Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to the team that I fell in love with in the 80s when I was growing up. And so certainly a number of connections just to basketball and Los Angeles, and hence John Wooden. But I think the quote in particular, first of all, there are a handful of things that are appealing to it, to me about it. One, it applies to anything. In his case, it applied to building a sports team that worked well together. But I think it also applies to business, it applies to family, it applies to, frankly, everything in our lives. So that's sort of the first thing is it's just universal applicability across my life. And then I think second, and for me, this is the most important thing, is trust destroys success. Teams, so I guess you first have to believe that a team is better than the sum of its part, or the team, the sum of the parts is better than each individual one. And I think what ends up happening is that teams that don't succeed are oftentimes due to the fact that individuals don't trust each other. And you don't trust each other because you can't rely on the consistency of behavior, and you can't rely on the willingness of everybody to aim for the common goal as opposed, or to put the common goal ahead of their individual goal. I think one of the things that became very clear to me at some of the companies that I worked for in that second chapter, again, the sort of, I'll call it the loyalty chapter of my career, was if you do what's right for the customer, it will be what's right for you. We would talk all the time about, I'll give you one example, about delivering a coupon to a customer for a product that we knew they would already buy. And when in a lot of marketing textbooks, that would be considered a very silly thing to do. If you're already going to get the money from the customer, then why lose the 50 cents in margin on the Diet Coke that they were going to buy? And the argument was always that there's more headroom in that household. And if you make them believe that you have developed a relationship with them, you understand their needs, and that in fact you're helping them save money on things that they would already buy, they perceive you to be looking out for them as opposed to looking out for you. And the moment you do that, they will spend more money with you. And as a result, you have now looked out for you. And so to me, this notion of
Love
character
that.
is really this argument that if you look out for the greater good, it will be ultimately what's good for you. And if you can build a culture that truly believes that, I think you end up with a massively outperforming team, leadership team, or broader team across the organization.
Yeah. It's so interesting hearing it put the way you just did, which is fabulous because a lot of times we would talk about you at Ernst & Young, we did a lot of stuff around the voice of the client, so client satisfaction, things like that. But we also did a lot of internal surveys, and you would also say that if your employees are happy, your clients are going to be happy, right? So, but this is the same thing, but you put it in a little different light, which I love.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and you're right. That applies absolutely internally and externally. So I
yeah,
completely agree with you there.
yeah, yeah. So, you've touched on it a little bit, but so what do you think is how have you been successful in terms of building trust and rapport with your teams?
It's a good question. Certainly a lifelong area of progress. So would certainly never state that I have arrived at the perfect place where everybody trusts me. I think that's just always going to be an ongoing process. My sense is there are probably a handful of foundational elements to that. So one, um, just being vulnerable, or being open and honest about my own challenges, areas where I have not been successful or where I've failed. Um, I think that's really important, just to understand or help others understand that I don't expect perfection of you because I don't see perfection in myself. And so it's okay for you to make mistakes. Let's work through them. And mistakes are sort of delayed successes, if you will. So let's just figure out a way to fix this going forward. And I think that's something, to me, frankly, it's probably been eye-opening to have children and recognize that they also need to see their dad fail at times, because you need them to understand that that's just a regular course of life. So for me, it's been really valuable to start with an expectation with everybody that I work with that I am flawed, and as a result, I don't expect perfection from you. Um, Second, for me, I'm a big believer in transparency and kind of, free flow of information. So I have staff meetings with my direct reports every week. And the bulk of those meetings is focused not necessarily on making decisions in those meetings. Let's face it, there are very few decisions that require my entire direct reports to be involved in the decision making. And so I tend to spend much of that time focused on information transfer. So the first week of every month, we focus on our sales organization and they talk about the largest clients that are coming up for renewal or that we have that are in our pipeline. The second week is very much focused on technology and product. And so our product teams are sharing with the group what products we're working on, where we've made progress, what releases are coming out when, what features are in where. The third week, typically, we have our financials closed by then. So the third week, our finance team joins the meeting and we talk about the financials of the business, how the last month looked, quarter to date, year to date, et cetera. And then the fourth week typically focuses on our operations. Our operations teams talk about what challenges they're facing, where we're seeing, efficiencies gained, where we're seeing challenges, et cetera. And again, in each of those four meetings, the focus is for one team to bring information and updates to the rest of the team, which then allows the subsets of those teams that do actually make decisions during the rest of the week to go off and make those decisions. But hopefully it's quicker and easier to make those decisions because we're all coming from the same baseline of information. And so that to me is another big area of trust building is let's just free form share information across the organization so we all understand where we're coming from. And then I think the last area is to just acknowledge um, it's to build a set of metrics and then track those metrics over time consistently. So don't just choose to track the metrics when they're going to show well. Don't just, only, present the subset of metrics that make you look good, but instead set the expectation. These are 6 metrics that we're going to use to measure our business. And every month consistently, I'm going to report these metrics out. And where they're doing well, let's pat ourselves on the back. And where they're not doing well, we're going to be thinking about what plan we have put in place to fix those things. And in some sense, that's tied to the first item that I mentioned, but that's more about the business and making the company recognize that we're going to hold ourselves accountable to a set of metrics,
Right.
whether they're good or bad. And my sense is that that also tends to build trust, that people understand what we're focused on, what's important to us, and that we're not going to try to sugarcoat things. We're going to tell you exactly the way it's working. And so we have started introducing, we go through financials in 5 every town hall now. We share financials about the company, and we don't just highlight the companies that are or the parts of the business that are doing well. Not
Yeah.
intended to shame those that are not doing well, but it's intended to be very transparent about where we have challenges and where we don't, and how we need the whole company to come together and help the businesses that are currently challenged.
You're like a textbook leader. I'm telling you, it's very impressive to listen to you, and you can tell you're passionate about these things. It's very impressive. They're lucky to have you on top.
You're
So,
too kind. You're too kind.
yeah, no, and it's also interesting because if you hear of if you look at Gallup always does these surveys about percent of people who are fully engaged and what's important to them, and a lot of things you touched on is really important. People want to know, they want that transparency, they want to know where they stand, they want consistency and accountability, and they want a leader who is going to be open, that they can get to know. Really, you've touched on all of those key pieces. So it's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
We have I'm a big believer in kind of the loss aversion theory, right? Where we tend to overvalue losses and undervalue gains or wins. And and I think what unfortunately ends up happening is we absolutely put out surveys. We put out client-facing surveys for NPS scores, and we put out employee-facing surveys at the end of every town hall to get feedback on how the town hall performed. We will naturally over-index to the negative responses that come back. And first of all, the bias is to where people are going to respond to surveys when they have something on the extremes to share. Either they're extremely happy about something or extremely unhappy about something. And then we naturally, when reading the verbatims, will guide towards the things that are negative, right? Because we hate losing and we don't value winning as much
Yeah.
as we hate losing. And I think it's important to remind ourselves when we look through those things to balance, to reclaim the bias, Otherwise, you end up in a scenario where, well, people don't like to hear bad news because every time I share bad news, those are the comments that I get back on the survey. And then I think you end up in an outcome that isn't necessarily the outcome that it feels sort of morale building, if you will.
Yeah. Well, you have to take the time to celebrate success.
Correct?
And it's also, it's a continuous improvement journey that everyone's on anyway.
I
So
couldn't
kind
put
of
it better.
keep putting it through that lens. Yeah. So
Exactly.
if you did a snapshot today, what would you say is your biggest challenge and opportunity right now?
About me, about the business, about life.
Um, However you choose to answer that.
Um,
I guess as a
so
leader, I think as a
maybe as
leader, let's
yeah,
look at it through that lens.
I think for me personally, one of the things I've been grappling with is I've recently taken on the CEO role, and um, I want to keep reminding myself that that's not the destination. The CEO role is a means to an end. The end is a company that our employees are incredibly proud to work for, our clients are incredibly proud to engage with, and our investors are incredibly proud to be associated with. Um, Being the CEO simply means that I get an opportunity to have a slightly larger impact on our ability to hit all three of those things. And so I would argue the maintaining the humility of appreciating that a title change is the first step, not the last step, is probably the thing I am going to constantly keep reminding myself of and ask those around me to keep reminding me of as well. And that my career won't be judged by the title I held, but rather the people around me and what they will say about their time working with me, and keep focusing on that.
The legacy that you leave. But I still hope that you've taken some time to celebrate your success. But it's a
Sure.
beautiful thing. And I do, we all, I think it's an interesting lens to look at it through because it's about, what is that legacy, right? How are you leaving things better than when you
Absolutely.
came? So I
Absolutely.
get that. So changing topics a little bit, it's always interesting to hear what leaders are, how they're staying sharp. What are you reading or listening to right now?
So I'm a big podcast listener. I find it's easy to plug in 5, 10 minutes at a time at the gym, or at the on a commute. I tend to be able to listen to things on a 1.5 to 2x speed, so it feels like it's a very compact way to get a lot of information. There's some component of it which is just current events. I stay involved, wanting to understand what's going on, just to be able to have conversations with
Yeah.
people that I engage with. I'm a big fan of a handful of technology podcasts. So there's one in particular that focuses on AI, and in particular what we're using AI for broadly. And then there's one that's very specific to AI for the legal industry, both of which have been quite useful. Um, I'm a financial, like I enjoy learning about, investing in the markets. And just again, in some sense, it's a little bit of how do you evaluate companies? How do you value companies? And so the Motley Fool tends to be one that I'm a big fan of, and I tend to listen to a lot there. And then there's a Lakers podcast that I listen to once in a while when I truly just want to break from everything. But that tends to be the bulk of what I tend
Yeah.
to consume in terms of, I don't know, learning content, if you will.
Yeah. If you think about, even since you went to school, is there a leadership book that stands out in your mind that, as you've continued with your three chapters and evolving and in your own leadership journey, that's really, you kind of go back to?
Yeah. Um, we are actually currently in the process of implementing some of the strategies from a book called The Advantage by Pat Lencioni.
I'm
And
familiar
so
with that.
a lot
Yeah.
of focus on building the right team, building a healthy organization, not just a smart organization. And then once you build that healthy organization, how do you define what it is that we want to do, sort of create clarity, and
hmm
then over communicate that clarity to the rest of the organization. I'm a big believer in that. And this particular book, I think there are three or four others that I've read that are
Good to
roughly
great, all of
similar.
that. Yeah, yeah,
But I love the tactical nature of this book, the discussion about, you need a 15-minute stand-up every single morning, and these
yeah.
are the kinds of things you should cover in that stand-up, and then you need a weekly meeting to cover these things. It's very helpful, and to me, I find that as being one of the most helpful whenever I read these sort of self-help books.
Yeah.
Is we can talk about the theoreticals. You can have me nodding my head about why this is all important. I don't know what the first step is to get on that journey. I want to be there. I just don't know how to get there. And so I find really valuable the books that break it down and start saying, okay, step one is this, step two is that. And it's allowing us to actually go on that journey and transform the sort of the operation, the way in which we operate as a leadership team.
Yeah, his books are great. Good to Great, The Daily Huddle, The Flywheel, all of those things really resonate and make a lot of sense.
That's
So
right.
thank you for sharing that. There's a recent book that I lead a CEO peer advisory group through Vistage, and it's called The Lazy CEO, or How Lazy CEOs Are Success, or something like that. And I thought it was excellent, and it gave some really great how-to things as well.
Got it.
So
Got it. No,
if
that's
you're looking
great.
for
I mean,
something new, that's a really good one as well.
I appreciate that. I think obviously they've got to get headlines by coming up with a catchy title. Uh,
Yeah.
my the concern I would simply have in that title is simply I don't want it's we need to hold everyone in the business accountable, including ourselves, and that means
Oh
we
yeah,
need
yeah, no, no,
everybody.
no, yeah, yeah, yeah,
But the
yeah.
word
This
lazy
is,
should not be in our
yeah, no. What
lexicon.
it's meant to say is, how do you fix things and then delegate it, and how do you really focus your time where you need to focus
Exactly.
it? And it kind of
Exactly.
tells you how to do it. Yes, but it is a catchy, and I probably have it totally wrong in terms of I probably botched that up, but I will get that to you. It's really
I
good.
appreciate it.
So, in closing, and thank you so much for your time and your thoughtful comments. What would you say is, what I would say, the critical success factors or secret sauce to being an effective leader today?
Um, it's a great question because it's hard to limit it to one. I would argue that may be the one thing that may be a thing I need to work on quite a bit, which is prioritizing and limiting myself to one thing. But I think the biggest thing for me is probably focused on empathy. I have this conversation with my kids. My kids are 9 and 7. I talk to them a lot about the idea of empathy, and the thinking for me is AI probably has a massive impact on every single job over the course of my kids' professional life, right? At some point in the next, I don't know, 70 years, AI is probably going to impact any job that might at some point be on their radar screen as they go through their childhood and enter the adult workforce. But I think so long as you have empathy, it will be the last skill. Let's put it that way. It'll be the last skill that can truly be replaced by a machine. And as a result, it probably creates the sort of greatest longevity for anybody, uh, trying to stay in the workforce. And I think it does so because of a couple of reasons. One, obviously, we have engagement with our employees, and every employee is going through their own thing, and it makes them great on a Tuesday and struggle on a Wednesday. And if you can't appreciate that, either because you yourself have gone through it or you have the capacity to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, it just makes it very difficult for you to engage and get the most out of that employee. And then I think the same would be true for our clients. At the end of the day, the moment a client calls with an issue, if my response is to get defensive and talk about how I don't really think we did anything wrong here, that's not what the client needs to hear in that moment. It may be true, but the first thing the client needs to hear is, okay, you and I are in this together to figure out how we're going to resolve the situation and get you to an outcome that you need. And then we can worry about who deserves blame or how we resolve the economics of the situation after the fact. But unless you have the empathy to understand that the client has called you because they have a problem that needs solving, and you have probably had similar or adjacent problems, where how have you felt in those same situations? You can't truly deliver excellent customer service. And so to me, I think a critical success factor, whether it's something I can point to something I'm proud of in my journey, or something I would argue we can't teach enough of, whether it's at the elementary school level or college or in the workplace. I think it would really come down to that, is just appreciate that everyone is unique. Do your best to put yourself in the other person's shoes, and then try to expose yourself to enough different situations that make it easier for you to put yourself in other people's situations, so that you can truly work together to solve challenges that we'll face in any given situation.
Yeah, I love that. At the end of the day, as a leader, we're all in the people business, and
Yeah,
so that's such a
right.
critical piece. So thank you for sharing that and a great way to end our podcast. So thank you, Nishat. It's been so lovely getting to know you. I'm so glad my audience is getting to know you, and just wishing you tons of continued success. And as I said, your team is lucky to be working for you. You're a very thoughtful leader. So
I
thank you.
appreciate that. And thank
Yeah,
you, Margaret. I love what you're doing here with this podcast. So excellent
thank
work.
you. And thank you all for listening. This is the stuff that growth is made of.